As the only granddaughter of the late Royal Chancellor, Evelyn Lansing was the most celebrated lady in the capital's high society. But for the sake of Julian Sterling, heir to the Sterling family, she turned herself into the city's biggest joke. When Julian lay unconscious after falling off a cliff, Evelyn traveled 1,000 miles alone to find a reclusive healer and waited outside his door for a week without food or water. After bringing the healer back, she cast aside her reputation and spent 3 years at Julian's bedside, nursing him back to health with her own hands. Yet the moment he woke up, he publicly declared that he intended to marry Evelyn's maid, Ivy. The news tore through the capital like wildfire. Everyone in the capital knew that Evelyn Lansing had staked her reputation on Julian Sterling for 3 long years. No one believed she'd swallow her pride and let a servant girl walk all over her. So, when Julian showed up at Evelyn's gate with a matchmaker in tow, half the city turned out to watch, waiting for her to make a scene. Even Julian's face darkened as he instinctively pulled Ivy behind him. "Lady Evelyn, I know you took care of me for 3 years. But I can't marry you out of guilt. I won't let you make things hard for Ivy either." Evelyn's expression didn't change. She calmly held out a list and replied, "You worry too much, my lord. This is the wedding gift I prepared for Ivy. She's been at my side since she was a child, so we're as close as sisters. Consider it a token of my regard. I only hope you'll treat her well." Julian glanced down at the thick ledger, surprise flickering in his eyes. Behind him, the crowd erupted into whispers. Has Lady Evelyn changed her ways? Last year a lady barely exchanged 2 words with Lord Julian, and Lady Evelyn tore the hairpin right out of her hair and threw it in front of everyone. That's right. At the winter festival, some noble girl handed Lord Julian a candle, and Lady Evelyn threw every single candle into the lake. And now she's preparing a wedding gift for the maid he's about to marry? Even as the murmurs drifted into her ears, Evelyn's face didn't so much as twitch. "Martha," she called quietly. The old lady who was standing at her side stepped forward with a wooden box in hand. Evelyn reached out and opened it. Inside lay a scroll, its seal stamped in gold. It was a marriage contract. She looked up at Julian, her voice light and even as she said, "This is the marriage contract my grandfather arranged for us. Today, I'm going to burn it in front of everyone. From this day on, the engagement is void. You and I will marry whomever we please. We'll have nothing more to do with each other." She took a candle from Martha and held the flame to the corner of the contract. The fire had just caught the paper's edge when someone suddenly shouted, "My lady, no." Ivy lunged forward and slapped the flame out with her bare hand. Her palm turned red and raw from the burn. She trembled with pain, but dropped straight to her knees in front of Evelyn. "My lady, I would never dream of marrying the young lord. Just being able to serve you and him every day is more than enough for me." She started slapping her face repeatedly. Within moments, her cheeks swelled up. The startling sight made the crowd gasp. Julian's face changed instantly. He strode forward and pulled Ivy up, staring down at the blistered, swollen mess of her hand. The pain in his eyes nearly spilled over. "Someone, get medicine, now." Then, he turned to Evelyn, and all that tenderness curdled into fury. "I'm the one marrying Ivy. I'm the one calling off the engagement. If you're angry, take it out on me. Don't put on this act with the marriage contract." Evelyn paused, then gave a small, formal curtsy. "You're right, my lord. I wasn't thinking clearly." She turned and took a document from Martha's hands. "This is Ivy's indenture papers. I'm handing them over today as well. From now on, she has nothing more to do with me." Julian froze. He had expected her to cry and make a scene. He had expected her to use the 3 years they'd spent together to guilt him, or use their marriage contract to force him into staying. He never expected this kind of calm. An odd, uncomfortable feeling rose in his chest. He blurted out, "Your reputation is already ruined. Break off this engagement too, and what noble family in the capital will ever dare court you? You looked after me for 3 years. I'm not an ungrateful man. I'll marry Ivy, but I won't shortchange you either. Don't worry. A month from now, when Ivy marries into my household, I'll come here myself and formally propose. You'll have the position of secondary wife." He didn't wait for Evelyn's answer. He gathered Ivy carefully into a carriage and left in a hurry with the matchmaker. The crowd slowly dispersed. Evelyn turned and walked back into the estate. The moment she crossed the threshold, the composure she'd forced herself to keep up completely fell apart. All the strength drained out of her body. Martha rushed to help her sit, her eyes red-rimmed. "My lady, are you really going to be his secondary wife?" Evelyn shook her head. "I have other plans for my marriage." Martha clenched her handkerchief. "When the young lord lay unconscious for 3 years, you never left his bedside. People called you shameless and laughed at you for chasing a hopeless dream. You bore every bit of it, and now you're just going to let it go? You'd be handing everything to that wretched girl for nothing." Evelyn didn't answer, just smiled faintly. Memories of her last life came flooding back. In that life, she used their childhood bond and her 3 years of devotion to force Julian to honor the engagement. But after the wedding, she discovered his heart had belonged to Ivy the whole time. He used to visit Evelyn's chambers every day under the excuse of checking on her, but it was really only to catch a glimpse of Ivy. Later, she learned from a servant that Julian had once fallen into a river as a child and been saved by a woman. He happened to see Ivy holding the crystal pendant he lost that day, so he'd mistaken her for the one who saved him. But it had been Evelyn who'd risked her own life and jumped into the water to save him. She'd burned with fever for half a month afterward, nearly dying from it. When she learned the truth in her last life, jealousy had driven her half mad. In a fit of rage, she signed a document marrying Ivy off to a crude stable hand in the residence. Ivy suffered under his abuse day after day until she couldn't bear it anymore and drowned herself in the river. Julian had hated Evelyn for it. She gave him 3 children, but he never once looked at them. Each baby was carried away and given to another family the moment they were born. He locked Evelyn deep in the estate and forbade her from seeing anyone. She spent the rest of her life alone, drowning in her own bitterness, until she died. This time around, as she watched Julian shield Ivy behind him like that, she suddenly found she had no interest in fighting for any of it. Coming back to herself, Evelyn pulled a letter from her sleeve and handed it to Martha. "Send this to my uncle. Tell him I'll accept the marriage with the Ashworth family in the Southlands." Martha was stunned. "My lady, are you really going through with this alliance? You and Lord Richard were only children when you last met, more than 10 years ago. I hear he's grown cruel in his dealings. Your uncle only wants to send you there to shore up the Lansing family standing at court. I fear you'll suffer after marrying into that family." Evelyn waved a hand. "Martha, don't worry about it. My mind is made up." Martha opened her mouth to argue, but ultimately just sighed and left the room. Evelyn sat alone by the window, watching the candle flame flicker. Everyone said Richard Ashworth, heir of the Ashworth family, was cold and merciless. Anyone who crossed him ended up ruined, their whole family destroyed. But Evelyn knew better. He'd only built that reputation to hold together a family that was falling apart around him. In her last life, she believed the rumors too. Later, after Julian locked her away in the estate, the servants took advantage of her fallen status, cutting her meals and trimming her allowance. Years of that treatment wore her down to nothing. Somehow, Richard learned of it. He'd gone after Julian at court again and again, closing in slowly, until he finally forced open the doors that had kept Evelyn prisoner for half her life. By the time he found her, she was already at the end of her strength. Just before her mind slipped away, she'd heard his voice, rough with pain as he said, "I should have fought for you back then. I should have taken you away from Julian myself. But it's too late now. It's too late for everything." Evelyn's thoughts drifted back to the present. It wasn't too late this time. In this life, she would be the one to go to Richard first. After learning she'd agreed to the marriage, her uncle sent a reply the very next day. A messenger rode through the night to deliver word that he would come to the capital in a month to escort her south. Evelyn stared at the letter for a long moment, then dropped it into the brazier at her feet. She watched the paper catch fire, then rose and crossed to the cabinet, pulling out a carved wooden chest. Inside were all the gifts Julian had given her when they were young. Her face betrayed nothing as she tossed every last item into the flames. Everything she'd once felt for him, every trace of affection, burned away along with those things. The next day, an invitation for a garden party arrived from the Grand Duchess, Selina Winchester. Evelyn meant to decline, but Selina had decreed that every noble daughter in the capital had to attend, so she had no choice but to change and go. At Selina's estate, Evelyn spotted a group of noble young ladies who used to be friendly with her. They were gathered in a pavilion nearby, needling Ivy with pointed remarks. "You're a servant girl. How do you have the nerve to show your face at the Grand Duchess garden party? Stole your mistress' fiancé and now you think you're the lady of the house. Some people can climb as high as they like. They'll never turn into anything but what they started as. Keep your voice down. She's the young lord's darling now. Say the wrong thing and she'll whisper it in his ear, then you'll be the one paying for it." Ivy stood with her head bowed and eyes rimmed red, the picture of wronged innocence. Evelyn frowned and instinctively steered clear of the whole mess. She wanted nothing more to do with Ivy. But she'd barely turned around when she heard footsteps behind her. She looked back to see Ivy hurrying toward her, skirts gathered in her hands, already bending her knees to curtsy. "You're the young lord's intended now. You don't need to curtsy to me anymore," Evelyn said while stepping aside, her tone distant. Ivy blinked and looked up at her, tears shining in her eyes, her voice breaking as she replied, "My lady, are you still angry with me? You've shown me such kindness. I never meant to compete with you for anything." She reached out to take Evelyn's hand as she spoke. Evelyn stepped back, out of reach. Ivy's hand closed on empty air, then her whole body suddenly pitched toward the stone railing. "My lady, help me." Evelyn's hand shot out on instinct. But the moment her fingers caught Ivy's sleeve, she was yanked forward hard, and the two of them went tumbling together into the icy pond. The cold water closed over Evelyn in an instant. She held her breath on reflex and kicked desperately toward the shore, but Ivy had her wrist in a death grip. No matter how hard she struggled, she couldn't break free. As the two of them sank together, icy water poured into Evelyn's nose until her vision went dark at the edges. Someone shouted, "Someone's fallen in. Help." A figure shoved through the crowd and dove into the pond without hesitation. Through the blur of water, Evelyn saw Julian swim past her. He wrapped an arm around Ivy's waist, pulled her close against his chest, and swam for shore without so much as a backward glance. Evelyn froze for a second, then choked on another mouthful of water. After flailing around for a few seconds, she finally managed to steady herself and emerge from the water. When she looked up, she was met with Julian's furious gaze. "Lady Evelyn, is this how petty you are? You can't even stand to share with her? I already promised to make you my secondary wife. Why do you keep pushing Ivy like this? You shoved her into the water. You know she can't swim," he ranted. Evelyn floated there, shivering all over, her lips trembling as she tried to speak. But Ivy got there first, eyes red-rimmed as she explained, "It's not my lady's fault. I lost my footing and pulled her in with me." Julian let out a weary sigh. "You're still defending her. If she treats you like this now, what will happen once the two of you are living under the same roof? She'll walk all over you." He looked back at Evelyn, his gaze hard as ice. "You like pushing Ivy into the water so much? Then, stay in there and enjoy it. Someone watch her. No one pulls her out until I say so." With that, he swept Ivy up and walked away, giving orders as he went, "Send for a physician. Ivy's constitution is delicate. We can't risk her catching a chill. Lord Julian. You dash." Evelyn grabbed the stone edge again, but the moment she got a grip, one of the guards Julian left behind kicked her right back into the water. Countless eyes bore down on her from every side. But with Julian's orders, no one dared step forward to pull her out. She floated in the freezing water and stopped fighting. In that moment, whatever was left of her feelings for Julian died completely. It wasn't until the garden party ended that the estate servants finally helped Evelyn climb out, soaked and shaking. Martha went pale at the sight of her, fumbling to get her into a carriage. That night, Evelyn came down with a raging fever. In her delirium, she seemed to slip back to age 15, right after her grandfather died. That was when all those relatives who'd once doted on her for his sake suddenly turned cold and started treating her like a bargaining chip for marriage alliances. It was Julian who had stood up for her back then, telling them all, "Lady Evelyn will be my wife one day. Anyone who wrongs her answers to the entire Sterling family." But the scene shifted, and all that was left was a bottomless lake. She swam and swam but could never reach the shore. Evelyn didn't know how long she slept. When she woke up, she found Martha slumped over the edge of her bed, keeping watch. Her throat was too dry to speak. She could only lift a hand and brush it against Martha's. Martha startled awake, and the moment her eyes met Evelyn's, she burst into tears. "My lady, you're finally awake. You've been asleep for 7 whole days. The physician said if you didn't wake up soon, you might not make it." She carefully fed Evelyn some water, her eyes still red-rimmed. "Lord Julian ordered every physician in the city to attend to that wretched girl. No one was allowed to come treat you. I ran myself ragged and couldn't get a single physician to come. In the end, I had to beg an old physician I've known for years. He snuck in through the back door in the middle of the night." Evelyn listened to her with a sharp pang in her chest, but it settled quickly. "Martha, don't cry anymore. It's over now," she said softly. While Evelyn recovered, Julian sent over a plethora of gifts. Whenever she'd been upset in the past, this was exactly how he used to win her back. But looking at box after box of jewelry now, she felt nothing at all. She simply told Martha, "Have all this taken to the storeroom." She spent another week in bed before she was fully back on her feet. Over those days, she heard plenty from Martha about what was happening outside. The story of what happened at the garden party had already been turned into a tale by the storytellers and was spreading through the city. Everyone was calling Ivy shameless, accusing her of stealing her mistress' fiancé and then pushing her into a pond on top of it. Julian had put out an order to silence the talk, but he couldn't stop the whole city from gossiping. Martha recounted all this and huffed indignantly. "My lady, you were nothing but good to that wretched girl. She never lacked food or clothes. Not one servant in this city had it as easy as her. Whatever people are saying about her now, she brought it on herself." As she listened to Martha ramble on, Evelyn couldn't help the corner of her mouth curling up. A few days later, with the weather turning fine, Martha set up a lounge chair in the garden and helped Evelyn settle into it to soak up some sun. The two of them were chatting idly when someone started pounding on the gate. Martha had barely risen to answer it when the gate was forced open from outside. Julian strode in, his face like a thundercloud, teeth gritted. "Are you the one spreading those rumors out there? Ivy's been heartbroken over it for half a month. Today, she insisted on going out to buy you an apology gift, and she collapsed in the street. She still hasn't woken up. And here you are, sitting in the sun without a care in the world." Evelyn looked up at him, calm. "Those rumors have nothing to do with me." "Nothing to do with you?" Julian sneered. "Who outside this household would even know what happened to Ivy except your own people? And you're still going to claim you had nothing to do with it? Don't tell me you're going to say Ivy started those rumors and hurt herself on purpose just to slander you." Evelyn frowned, her tone turning cool as she added, "If I really wanted to move against Ivy, I wouldn't need rumors. I would have just had her sold off instead of handing over her indenture papers to you. I wouldn't stoop to something like this. Besides, I've already decided to dash." A weak voice cut in from the gate, interrupting her. "My lord, don't blame my lady." Ivy stood there, swaying, one hand braced against the doorframe. What they're saying out there is true. I'm the one who ruined my lady's engagement. Whatever comes of it, I deserve it. Julian rushed over the moment he saw her, reaching out to steady her. You're still so weak. Why did you come all this way instead of resting? Where were the servants? Why didn't anyone stop you? Ivy leaned against him, shaking her head. I begged the steward to bring me here. I was afraid you'd hurt my lady because of me. I'm just a servant. It doesn't matter what happens to me, as long as it makes her feel better. Julian's face darkened further as he listened. He turned to Evelyn, his gaze icy. Ivy has suffered so much because of you, and she's still thinking of you at every turn. And you won't even admit to what you've done. It seems like nothing short of a lesson will teach you to make peace with her. At his signal, the attendants behind him surged forward, hauling Evelyn up from the lounge chair and binding her to a wooden bench. 20 strikes. Let that teach her a lesson, Julian ordered. Martha threw herself at his feet and frantically begged, My lord, please, don't. My lady hasn't fully recovered. 20 strikes could kill her. Beat me instead. Evelyn lay bent over the bench, watching Martha beg on her behalf, and felt a sharp ache behind her nose. Julian's face stayed blank. Do it. The rod came down hard, pain exploding across Evelyn's back. She bit down and let out a stifled groan. Martha rushed forward the moment she saw it, throwing her whole body over her mistress. The blows kept falling, each landing with a dull, heavy thud. It felt like each one struck Evelyn's heart harder than the last. Tears sprang to her eyes. Martha, get up. You're too old to take this. Martha clung to her, her voice growing fainter and fainter. I'm fine, my lady. My skin's tough. I can take it. Once the 20 strikes were finished, the attendants stepped forward to untie Evelyn. Julian had already left the estate with Ivy in his arms. Evelyn scrambled up on hands and knees and gathered Martha into her arms. The older woman was weak and pale, yet she still managed to smile for her mistress. Don't cry, my lady. It doesn't hurt. Tears kept streaming down Evelyn's face. Stop talking. I'll go get a physician right now. She turned in a panic, and that was when she saw several royal physicians hurrying toward her with their medicine chests. She froze for a moment, then pushed the thought aside and helped them carry Martha into her room, standing by as they worked. After a long while, one of the physicians packed away his tools and turned to Evelyn. The injuries below the waist are severe. She may never walk again. But she'll live, at least. At the physician's words, Evelyn felt like someone had just pulled her up from underwater. She gasped, her voice hoarse. Thank you. Thank you all. The physician waved a hand quickly. No need to thank us, Lady Evelyn. Lord Julian sent us here. He said what happened today was meant to give Miss Ivy some justice, and he hopes you'll remember this lesson and never do something like that again. With that, the physicians wrote out a few more prescriptions and took their leave. Evelyn sat on the edge of the bed, her chest tight with a dull ache. This was always how Julian operated. A slap, followed by a sweet to make up for it. She used to think that meant he cared. Now, she didn't want that sweet anymore. She sat by the bed all through the night. Not until dawn broke did Martha finally stir and open her eyes weakly, and only then did the knot in Evelyn's chest finally loosen. Julian showed up again 10 days later. When Evelyn stepped out of her room to find him standing outside, she stopped in her tracks. What brings you here, my lord? Julian clapped his hands, and behind him, attendants carried in box after box of engagement gifts, filling up half the courtyard. He let out a soft sigh. I've thought about this a great deal these past few days. I promised you the position of secondary wife, but never formally sent the engagement gifts. No wonder you felt insecure enough to quarrel with Ivy over it. I've already spoken with the family elders. 3 days from now, you and Ivy will both marry into my household together. Evelyn looked at the gifts and said nothing for a long moment. When she didn't respond, Julian frowned slightly. Is there something else you're unhappy about? Tell me. I'll make it right. Evelyn let out a light laugh. There's no need. Let's just leave it as it is. If there's nothing else, my lord, you should go. Taking her silence as agreement, his face relaxed. There's one more thing. Ivy has no living family left. You're the closest thing she has to family. So, on the wedding day, let her leave from your estate. Fine, she agreed without hesitation. Julian blinked, clearly not expecting her to agree so readily. Watching her calm profile, something strange stirred in his chest. But he quickly talked himself out of it, deciding she'd finally come around and accepted Ivy. The corner of his mouth lifted into a pleased smile. I knew you've always been reasonable. After securing Evelyn's answer, Julian gathered his attendants and left. Evelyn looked at the yard full of boxes and told the servants to carry everything into the storeroom. Over the following days, Julian sent people to decorate her estate, white silk draped everywhere. Evelyn paid it no mind. Instead, she began preparing to leave. Of the things in the storeroom, aside from the items Julian had sent, she gave everything else away to the servants. She kept only 2 maids and returned everyone else's indenture papers, setting them free. On the 3rd day, Julian arrived with Ivy. He looked around the quiet estate and frowned. Where are your servants? I won't be staying here much longer, so I let them go, Evelyn replied softly. Julian nodded, not pressing further. His gaze landed on the estate's main chamber. Ivy will be married from this house tomorrow. She's still not fully recovered, so let her stay in the main chamber. You're in good health, so the side room won't be a problem for you. Evelyn paused, then said, Martha is recovering in the main chamber. She's not in a state to be moved. My lord, there's no need for that. I don't mind the side room at all, Ivy chimed in gently. Julian frowned, clearly unhappy with the idea. You're going to be my primary wife. It's improper for you to leave for your wedding from any place other than the main chamber. Martha is just a servant. There's no reason the mistress should take the side room while a servant keeps the main one. He raised a hand, already calling for someone to move things. There's no need to trouble yourself, my lord. I'll move Martha to the side room myself, Evelyn said evenly. She turned and, with the help of one of the remaining maids, carried Martha to the side room. Once Julian had Ivy settled, he stepped into the side room and watched Evelyn work. I'm sorry to put you through this today. I'll make it up to you properly once we're married, he said, a note of guilt creeping into his voice. Evelyn's hands didn't stop moving. She was about to reply when a sharp cry rang out from the main chamber. Julian's face changed instantly. He turned and rushed off. Before long, he returned. He stood in the doorway, looking anxious. Ivy's wedding gown got torn by accident. I remember your grandmother left you one, years ago. You're going to be my secondary wife, so you won't be needing such a luxurious gown. Rather than let it sit gathering dust in the storeroom, why not lend it to Ivy for now? I'll have 10 new gowns made for you later. Evelyn's hands stilled for a moment, then she straightened. Fine. I'll go get it. She walked to the storeroom and pulled out the gown. The doves embroidered in gold thread across the fabric looked almost alive. She ran her hand over the surface of the gown. Her grandmother had spent nearly 3 months stitching it by hand. She still remembered her grandmother holding her hands, smiling as she said, one day our Evelyn will wear this and marry Lord Julian in style. Evelyn had blushed red at the teasing back then. But now, she would never marry Julian, and she'd never wear this gown either. Ivy looked at it and waved her hands, protesting, I couldn't possibly take your gown, my lady. Mine only has a small tear. It's fine to wear as it is. Julian took the gown and pushed it straight into Ivy's arms. Take it since it's given to you. She's only the secondary wife. What business does she have wearing such a luxurious gown? Ivy shot Evelyn an uneasy glance, then murmured, then, thank you, my lady. Evelyn said nothing. She turned and walked away. Julian watched her retreating back, some instinct making him take half a step to follow. But then, he glanced at Ivy beside him, cradling the gown with a delighted look on her face, and stopped himself. The next morning, drums and trumpets echoed through the capital. Word that Julian was marrying both a primary and a secondary wife on the same day had already spread through the city, and crowds lined the streets to watch the wedding procession pass. A carriage draped in white and gold wound its way through the city, white silk unspooling from one end of the street to the other. No one noticed the plain-covered carriage waiting outside the side gate of the residence. Evelyn was dressed in simple clothes, and she carefully helped Martha into the carriage. Before leaving, she lifted the curtain for one last look at all that bustle and color, none of which belonged to her. Then, she let the curtain fall and said quietly to the carter, let's go. The wheels rolled forward and creaked softly, carrying them toward the city gates. The Sterling estate was bathed in red and gold. Silk ribbons cascaded from the eaves, and tables laden with fine wine and roasted meat stretched from the central courtyard all the way into the outer street. Half the court had gathered to witness what everyone called Julian Sterling's grand gesture of generosity, elevating a humble maid to the rank of principal wife while graciously allowing the ruined granddaughter of the late Royal Chancellor to enter his household. Through the side door, Julian stood beneath the grand archway, dressed in a crimson silk tunic, embroidered with auspicious dragons. His posture was straight, his chin lifted, soaking in the toasts and polite laughter of the surrounding nobles. Yet every few seconds, his eyes darted toward the eastern gate. The auspicious hour draws near, Lord Julian, the master of ceremonies called out with a beaming smile. The bridal carriages have reached the end of the thoroughfare. Julian smoothed his sleeves. An odd flutter had settled in his ribcage that morning, a restless ache he had brushed aside as mere exhaustion. After today, everything would settle into its proper place. Ivy would have the honor she deserved, and Evelyn, after having her stubborn pride broken by reality, would quietly take her place in the western courtyard. She would realize how magnanimous he had been to offer her a home when no one else would dare take her. Music swelled down the street. The lead carriage, draped in pearls and ivory silk, came to a halt outside the main gate. The carriage door opened. Ivy stepped down, supported by 2 palace-trained maidservants Julian had specifically hired for the occasion. She wore the dove-embroidered gown Evelyn's grandmother had spent 3 months hand-stitching. The gold threads caught the morning light, shimmering like sunlight on water. Beneath her translucent red veil, Ivy looked fragile, breathtaking, and thoroughly radiant. The crowd erupted in murmured praise, flattering Julian on his open-minded nobility. Julian smiled faintly, stepping forward to offer Ivy his hand. When she placed her small, trembling palm in his, she looked up with wet, adoring eyes. My lord, she whispered, I feel as though I am dreaming. It is no dream, Julian said smoothly. You are the primary lady of the Sterling household from this moment on. He turned his head toward the rear of the procession, waiting for the second carriage, the simpler, smaller sedan meant for Evelyn. Behind Ivy's magnificent carriage, however, there was only empty street. The musicians lowered their flutes. The drumming faltered into an awkward silence. Julian frowned, his brow furrowing as he looked at the steward. Where is Lady Evelyn's sedan? Did she throw another tantrum and refuse to board? The steward's face was dead white. He ran forward, drops of cold sweat beading on his forehead, and dropped to his knees. My lord. We went to the Lansing estate to receive Lady Evelyn at the hour of dawn, but... Speak. Julian snapped, an inexplicable spike of irritation prickling his skin. What did she demand this time? More jewelry? Another formal procession? The gates were unlocked, my lord, the steward stammered, trembling so violently his teeth clicked. The residence is completely empty. Lady Evelyn is gone. Julian froze. For 3 heartbeats, the words made no sense to him. What do you mean, gone? There wasn't a single soul inside, the steward whispered. The servants were all dismissed 3 days ago. The furniture is bare. There was only this left on the altar table in the main hall. The steward held up a lacquered black box with shaking hands. Julian snatched the box, nearly tearing the latch off. Inside lay no letters of tearful farewell, no tokens of remorse. There was only a pile of white ash, the remnants of every letter, ribbon, and keepsake Julian had ever sent her over 15 years, and on top of the ash lay a single wooden plaque. It was the formal token of the Lansing family's withdrawal from the capital, sealed with the official wax of the Imperial Registry. Beside it lay the silver hairpin Julian had gifted her when he turned 16. Bent completely in half. A cold wind swept through the courtyard, rustling the red silk banners. The crowd fell dead silent. The mockery was palpable in the eyes of every attending noble. Evelyn Lansing hadn't sulked or waited to be taken as a secondary wife. She had discarded Julian Sterling like dirty water and walked away without leaving a single trace. My lord? Ivy asked nervously, clutching his sleeve. Did my lady, did she run away because of me? It's all my fault. I should go after her. Quiet, Julian hissed. His voice was dangerously low. His fingers dug into the lacquered box so hard the wood groaned. He remembered her indifferent face when she handed over Ivy's indenture papers. He remembered the faint, distant smile she had worn when she agreed to give up her grandmother's gown. She hadn't surrendered, she had been counting down the days until she could leave. Send out the guards, Julian ordered, his voice trembling with a fury he could barely contain. Block the city gates. Search every inn, every carriage station, every estate. Bring her back to me. Lord Julian, a senior elder from the Sterling clan, said sternly, stepping out from the crowd. Today is your wedding day. You have hundreds of guests from court watching. You are going to chase an unmarried woman who deliberately broke ties with you, abandoning your bride at the altar? Julian's chest heaved. He looked at Ivy, who stood with her head lowered, trembling in her grand stolen gown, and then looked back at the empty street, where no one was coming. An ugly, hollow panic, sharp and unfamiliar, struck him square in the chest. 200 miles south of the capital, the damp mountain mist was thick and cool, carrying the sharp scent of pine needles and wet stone. The modest carriage rolled over the uneven gravel road, its wooden wheels creaking rhythmically. Inside, Evelyn sat beside Martha, gently spooning warm broth into the older woman's mouth. Martha's face had regained a touch of color over the past week of travel, though the severe bruising from the rod strike still made every jolt of the carriage painful. My lady, you shouldn't be serving me, Martha protested softly, trying to push Evelyn's hand away. I'm an old servant. If your grandfather saw this from the heavens, he'd scold me. Grandfather would scold me if I didn't care for the woman who saved my life. Evelyn said quietly, blowing on another spoonful of broth. Rest, Martha. Once we cross the Black River border, we'll be in the Southlands. No one from the Sterling family can reach us there. Martha watched Evelyn's calm profile. For 3 years, she had watched her young mistress wither under Julian Sterling's bedside, her eyes constantly clouded with anxiety, grief, and desperate hope. But now, though Evelyn looked tired from the road, there was a quiet clarity in her eyes that Martha hadn't seen since the old Chancellor was alive. "My lady, are you truly not afraid?" Martha whispered. "Lord Richard Ashworth, they call him the Iron Wolf of the South. They say he purged his own branch families when they plotted against his father, and that his soldiers execute bandits without trial. If he is cruel. Rumors are often written by the frightened," Evelyn said softly. In her past life, she had believed those same rumors. She had thought Richard Ashworth was a bloodthirsty warlord who cared for nothing but iron and land. But she still remembered the sound of heavy iron boots kicking open the rotting doors of Julian's back courtyard where she had been left to starve. She remembered the sight of Richard, a man feared by the entire court, kneeling in the filth, his hands trembling as he covered her freezing body with his own fur cloak, weeping because he had come too late. He didn't come too late this time, Evelyn thought, pressing her fingers against the window frame. "I came to him." Suddenly, the carriage came to a slow halt. From the front, the driver called out with a nervous edge to his voice, "My lady. There's a troop of armored cavalry blocking the pass." Evelyn lifted the heavy curtain and looked out. The mountain pass was flanked by towering cliffs. In the center of the road sat 30 riders mounted on massive northern steeds, clad in black iron armor with silver wolf insignia stamped into their breastplates. At the head of the formation sat a tall man on a coal-black stallion. Richard Ashworth did not wear the soft silk robes favored by the dandy lords of the capital. He wore dark leather and fitted iron, a broadsword sheathed at his hip. His jaw was sharply carved, his brows straight like drawn blades, and his dark eyes were as deep and unreadable as an ancient well. The moment his gaze landed on the carriage, however, the terrifying chill surrounding him seemed to fracture. He swung down from his horse with effortless grace, handing the reins to a lieutenant, and strode toward the carriage. His strides were long and purposeful, his iron greaves clicking softly against the stone. The driver raised his hands in terror, but Richard didn't even spare him a glance. He stopped 3 paces from the carriage window and bowed deeply, executing a formal, immaculate court salute rarely seen from southern commanders. "Lady Evelyn," his voice was deep, slightly raspy, like gravel rolling under deep water. "I received your uncle's message. I feared the road bandits would trouble you, so I rode out 3 days early to receive you." Evelyn stepped down from the carriage, supported by her maid. She wore a simple dress of pale blue linen, her hair gathered loosely with a plain jade pin. Compared to the lavishly dressed noblewomen of the South, she looked almost fragile. Yet when she stood before Richard, she did not lower her eyes. She bowed with perfect, elegant poise. "Lord Richard, you honor me by coming so far." Richard's eyes traveled over her pale face, lingering on the shadows beneath her eyes, then dropped to her thin wrists. A subtle muscle in his jaw clenched. "You look exhausted," he said simply. Then, his sharp gaze flicked past her into the carriage, spotting Martha lying prone on the cushions. "Is someone injured?" "My nurse," Evelyn replied, a flicker of pain touching her tone. "She suffered 20 strikes with a wooden rod before we left the capital. The royal physician said her legs may never fully recover." Richard did not ask who ordered the beating. Everyone along the northern trade route had already heard rumors of Julian Sterling's insolence. Richard turned to his lieutenant. "Summon Dr. Yen from the vanguard. Have the Southland suspension carriage brought forward. It has feather-down mattresses. It will not jostle her wounds." "Yes, my lord." Evelyn blinked in surprise. "Lord Richard, she is only a servant." Richard looked down at her, his dark eyes intense and steady. "She is your person. In the Southlands, anyone who belongs to you will be treated with the respect due to the mistress of the Ashworth household." Evelyn's breath hitched slightly. For 3 years, Julian had constantly told her that Martha was just a servant and that Evelyn's insistence on defending her was petty and vulgar. To hear Richard speak so matter-of-factly of protecting her people felt like warm tea poured over frozen ground. "Thank you," she said softly. Richard held out his gloved hand to guide her toward the larger, warmer carriage. His touch was firm, yet remarkably gentle, taking care not to grip her fingers too tightly. "The capital treated you poorly, Lady Evelyn," Richard said quietly as the wind whipped his black cloak around them. "Let the Southlands make amends." Back in the capital, 2 weeks after the disastrous wedding, the Sterling estate was drowning in tension. Julian sat in his study, surrounded by unopened ledgers and cold cups of tea. His eyes were bloodshot, his jaw stubbled with dark growth. Ever since the wedding day, the capital had treated him as a laughingstock. The noble families who once fawned over him now made pointed excuses to avoid his Banquets. Even at court, older officials gave him cold looks, whispering about his ungratefulness toward the late Chancellor's granddaughter. To make matters worse, life with Ivy was far from what he had imagined. Without Evelyn to quietly manage the estate's finances, settle the servants' wages, and handle social invitations, the Sterling household had fallen into utter chaos. Ivy knew nothing of managing a noble estate. She spent money recklessly on silks and perfumes to prove her new status, yet cried and feigned faintness whenever the clan elders questioned her about missing ledgers. My lord, Ivy entered the study softly, carrying a bowl of sweet soup. She wore a heavy gold necklace that looked garish against her frail frame. You haven't slept in 2 days. Please, drink some lotus seed soup. I made it myself. Julian didn't look up. Where did you get the money for that necklace? Ivy's smile froze. I simply had the steward charge it to the estate's account. As the lady of the house, I must look presentable when the other noble wives visit. The other noble wives aren't visiting, Julian cut her off coldly, his voice like dry sandpaper. None of them have set foot here since the wedding. Ivy's eyes immediately welled with tears. She dropped to her knees beside his desk, trembling. Are you blaming me, my lord? I knew I shouldn't have accepted the position of primary wife. It's because I was a servant, isn't it? Everyone looks down on me, even you. In the past, the moment Ivy wept, Julian's heart would melt with protective instinct. But today, looking at her familiar tears, he felt only an overwhelming, suffocating exhaustion. Get up, he said, turning away. Stop crying over everything. Before Ivy could respond, the study door was thrown open. Julian's personal guard, Ethan, rushed in, breathing heavily. My lord. We tracked down the carriage that left the Lansing side gate on the morning of the wedding. Julian shot up from his chair, knocking his inkstone onto the floor. Black ink splattered across his robes, but he didn't care. Where is she? Did you bring her back? She didn't stay in any northern city, my lord, Ethan stammered. She crossed the Black River. She has entered the Southland territory. The Southlands? Julian's brow furrowed. Why would she go there? The Lansing family has no estates in the South. Ethan swallowed hard. She went there to marry Richard Ashworth, the lord of the Southlands, met her at the border with 30 iron cavalry. Their wedding date has already been registered with the Southern Prefecture. The word struck Julian like a physical blow. He stumbled back against the desk. Richard Ashworth? That barbarian? The ruthless butcher who ruled the southern provinces with an iron fist? Impossible, Julian muttered, his voice cracking. Evelyn hated him. When we were children, Richard once broke a boy's arm during martial practice, and Evelyn called him a monster. She wouldn't marry him. She's doing this to spite me. She wants me to chase her. My lord, Ethan said quietly, pulling a small wooden box from his cloak. While investigating the Lansing estate, we questioned the old servant who handled the estate's archives before he left. He gave us this. He said, lady. Evelyn left it behind because she wanted you to see it once you finally stopped lying to yourself. Julian grabbed the box. Inside was a dried medicinal pouch, stained with old dark blood, and an old diary kept by Evelyn's late grandfather. Julian opened the diary with trembling fingers. The page marked with a dried pressed leaf contained entries from 12 years ago. 12th day of the 7th month, Julian Sterling fell into the cold rapids of the Dragon River during the flood. Evelyn, only 10 years old, plunged into the whirlpool without hesitation and dragged him ashore using an old hemp rope. She stayed by his side in the freezing rain for 2 hours until help arrived, catching a life-threatening lung chill. She lost her mother's crystal pendant in the water during the rescue. When she woke from her fever, Julian had already been taken home. The Sterling family sent no thanks, assuming their own guard had found him. Evelyn told me, grandfather, as long as he lives, it doesn't matter who gets the credit. Julian's breath stopped entirely. The room seemed to spin violently around him. The river. The crystal pendant. He slowly turned his head to look at Ivy, who was still kneeling on the floor. Her face pale as paper. When Julian had woken up from his near-drowning 12 years ago, the only thing he remembered was a small, cold hand pulling him out of the water, and a crystal pendant gleaming in the sunlight. Years later, when he visited the Lansing estate, he had seen Ivy holding that exact crystal pendant. When he asked her about it, she had blushed, bowed her head, and whispered that she had kept his secret for years. Ivy, Julian's voice was barely a whisper, yet it carried a terror that made the hairs on Ivy's neck stand up. Where did you get the crystal pendant, you Showed me 5 years ago. Ivy trembled violently, shrinking back against the wall. My lord. I found it. Where did you get it? Julian roared, kicking the heavy mahogany desk aside. Papers scattered everywhere as he lunged forward, grabbing Ivy by her collar and dragging her up. His eyes were wild, blood-red with madness. Evelyn lost that pendant in the river. You were her personal maid. You stole it from her jewelry box while she was dying of fever, didn't you? Ivy burst into hysterical sobs. She had everything. She was the Chancellor's granddaughter. She had fine clothes, respect, and a grand marriage waiting for her. I was just a slave. Why couldn't I have a little bit of happiness? You loved me, my lord. You said you loved me. I loved the person who saved my life. Julian screamed, shoving her violently to the floor. Ivy crashed into the corner of the bookcase, crying out in pain as books rained down upon her. Julian stood in the center of the ruined study, his chest heaving, his hands shaking uncontrollably. It had been Evelyn. It had always been Evelyn. She had pulled him from the raging river when they were children, nearly dying of fever for it. She had traveled 1,000 miles across bandit-infested mountains to find a reclusive healer when he fell off a cliff. She had spent 3 long years wiping his sweat, feeding him medicine spoon by spoon, enduring the mockery of the entire city while he lay like a corpse. And the moment he woke up, he had called her petty. He had pushed her into freezing water. He had ordered her beaten with wooden rods. He had taken her grandmother's wedding gown and given it to the thief who stole her life. Ah! Julian let out a guttural, agonized scream, tearing at his own hair as he collapsed to his knees. The truth crushed him like an avalanche, shattering every piece of arrogance he had built his entire life upon. My horse, Julian gasped out, scrambling toward the door on his hands and knees. Ethan. Saddle my horse. Bring the guards. We're going south. We're bringing her back. The road to the Southlands took Julian 9 days of relentless, punishing riding. He rode through rainstorms and rocky passes, killing 2 horses from sheer exhaustion. He didn't eat, he barely drank water. His mind was consumed by a single, desperate thought: I will beg her. I will kneel in front of her. I will strip Ivy of everything. I will kill Ivy if she asks. I will give her the entire Sterling estate. She loved me for 15 years. She cannot simply stop loving me. By the time Julian's exhausted retinue reached the gates of Oakridge, the capital city of the Southlands, the entire city was adorned in deep crimson silk and shining silver lanterns. The festive atmosphere was 10 times grander than his own pathetic wedding in the capital. Laughter and music drifted from every tavern. The common folk lined the streets, tossing flower petals and cheering as long lines of ceremonial carts carried wedding gifts toward the grand Ashworth fortress. Who is getting married today? Julian grabbed an old street vendor by his collar, his voice ragged and wild. The vendor looked at Julian's mud-splattered clothes and bloodshot eyes in disgust, pulling away. Who else? Our Lord Richard is taking Lady Evelyn Lansing as his official duchess today. The Lord opened the city granaries to feed everyone for 3 days. Best wedding the South has seen in 50 years. Julian's vision went black for a moment. He shoved past the vendor and spurred his dying horse forward, galloping straight toward the grand gates of the Ashworth fortress. Evelyn, he roared, leaping off his horse as it collapsed from exhaustion. Evelyn. Before he could take 5 steps up the stone stairs, a dozen heavy halberds crossed in front of his chest with a sharp metallic clatter. Halt, the captain of the guard barked. Draw 1 step closer to the fortress gates and you will be executed where you stand. Get out of my way. Julian snarled, drawing his sword with a manic glint in his eye. I am Julian Sterling, heir of the Sterling clan. Evelyn Lansing is my betrothed. She belongs to me. She belongs to no one but herself. A cold, thunderous voice rang out from the top of the stairs. The guards parted immediately, slamming the butts of their spears against the stone in salute. Richard Ashworth walked down the broad stone steps. He wore a magnificent wedding robe of midnight black and deep crimson, embroidered with roaring silver, wolves and golden clouds. A heavy jade crown pinned his dark hair, giving him an imposing, regal aura that made Julian's ragged figure look like a beggar by comparison. Beside Richard walked Evelyn. Julian's breath caught in his throat. She wore a bridal gown of heavy crimson satin, woven with gold thread depicting phoenixes soaring over southern mountains. Her face was delicately painted, her skin radiant, her eyes clear and calm. There was no trace of the pale, shivering girl he had left behind in the freezing pond, nor the quiet woman who had taken her beaten nurse into the side room. She looked like a queen. Evelyn. Julian stepped forward, his voice cracking with a desperate sob. Evelyn, I know the truth. I know everything. Evelyn stopped at the top of the stairs, looking down at him. Her face remained completely placid, as still as deep water. I know it was you who saved me from the river 12 years ago. Julian cried, tears carving clean paths through the mud on his face. He dropped his sword, falling to his knees right on the cold stone steps in front of hundreds of onlookers. Ivy stole the pendant. She lied to me. I was blind, Evelyn. I was a fool. I've already written the divorce papers for Ivy. I had her thrown into the punishment chambers. I will give you the primary wife position. I will hold a wedding 10 times grander than this. Come home with me, please. You took care of me for 3 years. You waited outside the healer's door for 7 days. Without food. You loved me. You can't just throw 15 years away. The gathered soldiers and southern nobles murmured in disgust, but Richard did not move. He simply stood beside Evelyn, resting his hand gently against the small of her back, giving her his silent, unshakable support. Evelyn looked down at the man kneeling in the dirt. For 15 years, this man had been her entire world. She had bled for him, starved for him, wept for him, and in her previous life, died in bitter isolation because of him. Yet looking at him now, groveling in the mud, Evelyn felt no rage. She felt no lingering pain. She felt only an overwhelming, absolute emptiness. Lord Julian, she spoke. Her voice was not loud, but it carried clearly over the quiet courtyard. Do you think my love was something you could trade like grain in the market? That you could throw it in the mud when you had no use for it and pick it back up whenever you felt guilty? Evelyn, I was deceived. You were not deceived, Julian, Evelyn interrupted, her tone cutting through his excuses like ice. Even if Ivy had saved you 12 years ago, that did not give you the right to treat me like dirt. It did not give you the right to leave me in freezing water. It did not give you the right to break Martha's legs. You did those things not because you loved Ivy, but because you are selfish, arrogant, and cruel. You enjoyed watching me lower my pride for you. You enjoyed treating the Chancellor's granddaughter like an obedient dog. Julian flinched as if struck by a whip. No, Evelyn, that's not true. You said I saved your life twice, Evelyn continued softly, looking toward the southern sky where the sun was breaking through the clouds. You are right. I pulled a drowning boy out of the Dragon River when I was 10. And I spent 3 years nursing a dying man back to health. Consider those 2 lives my gift to you. We are completely, entirely even. From this day forward, Julian Sterling, you and I are nothing more than strangers who happen to walk beneath the same sky. She turned away without a single backward glance, gathering her crimson skirts to walk back toward the grand hall. Evelyn. No. Evelyn. Julian lunged forward, trying to scramble up the stairs. Clang. Richard's broadsword slipped 3 inches from its scabbard, the cold steel gleaming with lethal intent. Richard looked down at Julian, his dark eyes radiating a terrifying, suffocating pressure that forced Julian back to his knees. You have 5 minutes to leave the Southlands, Richard said, his voice low and absolute. If your shadow touches my territory by nightfall, I will take your head and send it back to the capital in a pickle jar. Get out. Richard sheathed his blade with a sharp snap, turned on his heel, and followed Evelyn inside. The massive iron gates of the Ashworth fortress slammed shut with a deafening boom, severing the past from the present once and for all. Julian returned to the capital a broken man. The journey back drained what little spirit he had left. By the time he reached the Sterling estate, the imperial court had already moved against him. The Lansing family's allies, freed from Evelyn's restraining influence, had submitted dozens of memorials to the emperor detailing Julian's unfilial behavior, his cruelty toward the late Chancellor's family, and the suspicious circumstances surrounding the Sterling family's tax records. Within a month, the emperor stripped Julian of his hereditary court titles and demoted the Sterling clan from their high-ranking status. The noble houses completely severed ties with them. The grand Sterling estate grew quiet and decrepit. Ivy, stripped of her position, was relegated to the drafty side courtyard. Her former arrogance crumbled into bitter madness. She screamed at Julian day and night, blaming him for bringing her from a comfortable maid's life into this ruined hell. Julian neither beat her nor spoke to her. He simply locked the courtyard gates and left her to live on cold rice and coarse water, the exact fate Evelyn had suffered in her past life. Julian spent his days sitting by the pond in his empty courtyard, clutching a broken silver hairpin. Whenever the cold rain fell, he would stare into the murky water, imagining the 10-year-old girl who had once jumped into the raging rapids to pull him ashore, and the young woman who had waited 7 days in the snow outside a healer's door just so he might live. He had held the rarest treasure in the world in his hands, and he had shattered it with his own arrogance. He would spend the rest of his long, bitter life remembering that. 2 years later, Southlands. Spring had arrived early in Oakridge. The plum blossoms were in full bloom, dusting the courtyard of the Ashworth fortress with soft pink and white petals. In the sunlit garden, Martha sat in a specially crafted wheeled chair lined with soft fox fur, laughing as she watched 2 young maidservants arrange fresh pastries on a stone table. Thanks to the Southland physicians, she had regained the use of her upper body and could even stand with a cane on warm days. "My lady, don't stand in the breeze for too long," Martha called out with a warm smile. "The physician said the young master inside you needs plenty of rest." Evelyn stood beneath the blooming plum tree, dressed in a comfortable gown of pale lavender silk. One hand rested gently against her rounded belly, her face glowing with health, serenity, and quiet contentment. Footsteps sounded along the stone path. Richard approached, having just returned from inspecting the border garrisons. The moment he stepped into the garden, the sharp, stern aura he wore on the drill grounds melted away. He took off his cold leather gloves and tucked them into his belt before stepping toward his wife. "Is our son kicking today?" Richard asked softly, reaching out to gently cup her cheek. His hands were warm from the spring sun. "He was active this morning," Evelyn smiled, leaning her head naturally against his broad shoulder. "He takes after his father. He refuses to sit still." Richard let out a low, rare chuckle, wrapping his arms securely around her waist to support her weight. He pressed a gentle kiss to her temple, breathing in the sweet scent of jasmine that always clung to her hair. "Let him be wild," Richard murmured softly against her ear. "As long as he protects his mother, I will teach him everything I know." Evelyn looked out across the vast, rolling green hills of the Southlands, where eagles soared freely against the clear blue sky. In her last life, she had died cold, alone, and trapped behind high walls, mourning a love that was never real. In this life, she had found wide skies, true honor, and a man whose devotion was as steadfast as the southern mountains. She turned in Richard's embrace, took his hand, and smiled, a genuine, radiant smile that belonged entirely to the future.